Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. This is Mike Dowdy. With me, as always, co-host Jen David Lang, who I was going to say aggressively well prepared.
That's good.
How's that?
Yeah,
You like that one?
and you would have put the adjective in if you had been aggressively well prepared.
Exactly. Right. All right. So I'm super excited about the book we're going to talk about today. And Jen, so you picked, and it was great because when you picked this book and sent and told me about it, and I adore the author. I just think his stuff is great. We're going to be talking about Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage: Why Organizational Health Trumps Everything Else in Business. And as somebody who has worked in, I think I'm on my 6th different educational organization, I'm here to tell you that that title is so true. When you talk about and people, you know it. If you've worked in a healthy organization versus one that's not, you know it. So I'm excited to talk about this and hear what he has to say about, Patrick couldn't join us, but Jen and I you're going to hear what Jen and I have to say about it. So
Close enough. Yeah.
Close enough. So why'd you pick this book?
Yeah, I think this is a really challenging time that schools are going through. I mean, I'm hearing people talk about staff vacancies, student disengagement, right? A lot of loss of funds, budgets are being cut. It's just a really tough time. And so, when you're sitting there as a leader shaking your head, where do I start? If you had asked that question to Patrick Lencioni, he would say, you got to start with organizational health, right? It's not going to be a new initiative, a new curriculum, a new program. It's really got to be organizational health because, it's really about the people in the school. And I'll give his definition of organizational health, but I think, Patrick Lencioni, I really like him. I think he has such a good eye. He really sees what works and what doesn't work in organizations and is able to capture it very, very crisply. And so, if you haven't read any of his other books, he has catchy titles like The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team or a great name, Death by Meeting. And most of those
are one of my favorites.
That's a great title. And most of his books are told like fables, like stories. And so he sort of took the lessons or the morals from all of those books. And then this book, The Advantage, is not told like a story. It's really told like, here you go. Here are the 4 components of organizational health in a very organized way. So anyway, so you could do what you just said, Mike. Like you could get your leadership team or your teachers together and say, who's ever worked in an organization that hasn't had organizational health, right? And they would know it, and they'd probably be able to point to some of the characteristics of what that means. But he says an organization has integrity, is healthy when it is whole, consistent, and complete. That is when its management, operations, strategy, and culture fit together and make sense. And so you can imagine during this post-pandemic difficult time, right? We've been teachers, we've been staff members at schools. We're like, wait a minute, how does this new policy make sense? It totally contradicts what we're already doing. Or wait a minute, this new initiative or this new staff hire does not make sense. And so I think people are looking for some clarity, alignment, consistency, and I think that is what he's talking about.
So that's interesting, though. When you read those 3 concepts, right? Whole, consistent, and complete. Okay? I get consistent. I think I understand whole and complete, but how are whole and complete different? Like what? I guess that would be my question. I mean, those concepts seem similar to me.
Yeah, I mean, complete, right? Something isn't complete if there's a part that's not there, and whole meaning that it comes together as a whole, right? That it's not just these disparate, your math department, your science department, but that it all is sort of building toward some type of whole. WHOL. Right. I mean, another way to think of it is you can think of the opposite. He said, your school or district doesn't have health if you're noticing, and everybody can pay attention right now, do a little self-assessment. Do you see a good deal of politics? Are you seeing high turnover? How about lack of clarity? low morale, it's a big one I'm hearing, or low productivity. So, you could almost put the definition of what it is and what it isn't on two walls and do a human Likert scale and ask your leadership team or your entire staff to stand along it. Where are we in the path toward organizational health? And I think a lot of schools right now would find that this is a good place to start.
So, all right, then let's get into it. Where do you want to start?
Well, so he says there are 4 disciplines of organizational health, which of course in the world of education, we think of something else for discipline. So 4 components of organizational health. And we can just go through them, really. Should we start with the first?
Let's go.
So, the first component or discipline that you need for organizational health is you got to build a cohesive leadership team. And really, as I read this book, I realized this whole book is really about leadership teams. And I do think that's a great place to start, at the top. First of all, he defines a team, which maybe that seems very mundane, but, he says a leadership team is a small group of people who are collectively responsible for achieving a common objective for their organization. And if you were to pull those words,
I was going to say, I heard a couple things in there. I heard small. So what does small mean? Because, I've been in districts where the cabinet or the senior leadership team was 4 people because I was in a small district and that's all we had. I've worked in other places where it's been 20 people.
So he says 3 to 12, right? He says 3 to 12, but I think the idea is just that, you're not inviting everyone to the table, but who, maybe it's your grade team leaders, maybe it's your assistant principals and department chairs, depending on, what level. But, he says it could be 3 to 12, but really anything over 8 is too big. I forget. I think it's Dan Coyle who says the 2 pizza rule, that you should be able to buy 2 pizzas, right? And everybody could have 2. If you had 8 people, feed the team. Yeah. So if you had 8 people, at least in New York, we have 8 slices to our pizza. I don't know about elsewhere, Chicago, but 2 slices for everyone. So so it's got to be small so that you can really know each other and build trust. We're going to get to that in a moment. And, this idea of collectively being responsible for a common objective or a goal, I think that's sometimes something we forget about, right? You have the 4th grade team leader or the special ed leader or the assistant principal for physical education. Everybody's coming with their own agendas, but really you need to be coming together and working toward a common objective. So that's just the definition. That's sort of who's there. And then he talks about 5 behaviors that are needed for an effective team. And if you look at the reverse of those behaviors, that's from his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So you can think about if you don't have these 5 behaviors, then you're going to have dysfunction. So, to go through them briefly, the first one is absolutely trust, something you all know, but we forget about, right? It's December right now. Maybe you did some trust building in September or when the school started, but you got to really attend to that and build the trust of a team, because you can't get to any of the other skills if you don't first work on trust. And that should be part of every meeting, getting to know each other, building trust, learning about each other's backgrounds. And then the second component is, or the second behavior is mastering conflict. And he says, imagine a continuum where on one side of the continuum, you have artificial harmony, right? Or the culture of nice, which we have a lot in schools, right? Oh yeah, Mike, I think everything you do is great, right? And then the other side where we just light into each other without any care for focusing on ideas and not people. And you want the spot in the middle. You want to be able to have healthy debate, healthy conflict, because you're not going to arrive at the best decisions if we don't question and challenge each other. He has an idea for an activity where everyone on the leadership team can share what was their history or their background growing up with conflict in their homes, right? Was it closer to that artificial harmony? Was everybody, taking each other down? What was conflict like? Because a lot of how we show up and how we respond to conflict has to do with our background. So it's just one small activity. Obviously, it takes a while to be able to surface true conflict. Third behavior that an effective leadership team needs is to achieve commitment. And that is, you've got to have everybody commit. So that means, like, let's say there's a group of 7 of us on the cabinet, and a few people are talking about a new initiative. Nobody else says anything, but the 5 of us still really agree. And we say, okay, there's the decision. Okay, go ahead, go forth and implement. Well, if the 5 people didn't really get to speak, they're not really going to commit. So what are the kinds of protocols or structures you need to make sure you hear from everybody so that you can really have it out and really make sure that you get to a commitment? And if you're not fully committed, then you're not going to be clear on decisions. And then all the people below you, all the teachers and everyone, they're going to end up having to duke it out because as a leadership team, you haven't fully committed to one clear decision. The fourth one is to embrace accountability, right? We have to be able to hold each other accountable. And that's, connected a little bit also to the conflict. And it's got to start with the leader, that you've got to be able to hold people accountable for what they are not doing, what they committed to doing. And contrary to what I think we hear in a lot of books is he says, you do it publicly, not privately. It's not mean, it's not outrageous, but for the small things, hey, Mike, you said you would have this graphic or this spreadsheet by today and you don't have it. So can you be sure to get it? I think that your model.
And I think that's, yeah. And I think that's a good one. And I think that it's easy to make accountability public if, like you said, if everybody's aware, everybody's committed to the same thing. And then you say, okay, Jen, we're going to need this spreadsheet. How long do you need to get it done? And then you say, well, I can probably have it done by the next meeting. Okay. So we put in the notes, Jen's doing the spreadsheet. She'll have a draft of it by the next meeting. And then when the next meeting comes, hey, Jen, where's the spreadsheet? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good structure to put in place to make sure that we are embracing accountability. He talks about a great exercise where everybody on the team writes down one thing that each person is doing on the team to contribute to the team and bring it forward, and one thing that's getting in the way, that's blocking the team. And then as the leader, you go first. So you're the principal, you go first. You say, okay, everybody, share the one thing I'm doing that's moving this team forward. So everyone shares lovely, nice things. And I say, oh, I feel so good. Thank you. Thank you. And then I ask for, now, what are the things that I'm doing that might in some way be holding the team back? And everybody goes around and shares one at a time. And I model what is it like to graciously take that feedback and say, thank you, I'm going to be a better leader because of it. Now who's next? And basically what this exercise is doing is saying, we right here, right now, are going to hold each other accountable, provide critical feedback, because you just saw, we just did it and I survived as the leader. So I survived, you can survive. And it's just a great.
But what if the feedback is way off base? Or what if I don't like the feedback?
I don't think he's saying you have to just, be silent, but I think it's the way. How do you respond, right? Oh, that's interesting that you feel that way, Mike. Is that something other people are seeing? Or I'm going to have to take a look at that next time. Or, it's just as opposed to, no way, I would, that's not me. If you know me, right. I wouldn't do that,
Yeah. Or even to ask probing questions. All right. Tell me more about that. Do you have some examples of that? But not in an accusatory way, but I'm trying to understand this a little bit better. Can you help me out here? That kind of thing.
And remember, Mike, this is number 4. But this is number 4. And, Mike Lencioni has this great, it's a 2-minute video. I think I'm sending it out with the summary where he draws a pyramid and the trust is at the bottom. So if you don't have that trust with your team, I wouldn't jump into an exercise about accountability or anything. I would start at the bottom. And and just a quote from this particular one, because accountability is so important. He says, it is one of the biggest obstacles I find preventing teams and the companies they lead from reaching their full potential. That is not holding each other accountable. It's a huge problem. So the final thing
and to come back to what you said earlier, I think, that is part of that that culture of nice sometimes that we fall into in schools. Oh, you didn't get it done. Oh, that's all right. We can, we'll do it next time.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of, I mean, sometimes people need to be a little uncomfortable. They need to, well, let me go back on that. I don't know if I'd say that. Sometimes discomfort helps, but I think, if the trust is there, if the commitment is there, then you don't want to let down your colleagues. So you're going to be accountable and you're going to do what you said you were going to do. So I'm glad you kind of clarified that a little bit, because yeah, these things do kind of need to happen in sequence in terms of building the cohesive team.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the last one is
focus on results. I remember many years ago being on a lovely teacher team and we had great time. Sometimes we ordered in Chinese foods in New York City, but it was because we didn't really, and it wasn't that we were doing anything bad. It was just that no leader had said to us, what is the result? What is the goal? What are you going toward? Or, I need you to do this for your results. So you really have to be focused on results, or it's not really a team. It's a group hangout or something.
Well, and I've heard people draw a distinction before. There's a difference between collegiality and congeniality.
Yes.
And, ultimately we're looking for collegiality, where, you're working together as colleagues in an environment of trust, where conflict can be productive, where everybody's committed and accountable to the results.
Yes. Yeah. And Patrick Lencioni goes so far as to say it doesn't matter how amazing the commitment, the relationships, the trust, all of that. If you're not focused on results, then you're not a part of a good team. You're not a part of an effective.
Yeah, it's great, but can the third graders read?
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the first discipline was build a cohesive leadership team. Now the second one, create clarity. So what does Lencioni say about clarity?
He says it's pretty rare to have alignment across the whole organization. And I'm sure people listening right now you can think about parts of your school or your district that are in direct conflict with each other. But he says to be effective, we really need, as a leadership team, he says we need to be in lockstep around a very few items. Absolutely. Right. And at the leadership team level. Because otherwise it's not like, oh, it's okay, Mike and Jen, they disagree a little bit or they're not so clear. No, like, again, if we are not clear at the leadership team level, what does that mean for the teachers and the paras and and everybody else? So we absolutely have to be clear. And he said, you might say, oh, well, our school has a mission statement, right? But usually a school's mission statement is not crystal clear when it comes to guiding every decision and everything at the school. So what he did is he designed 6 questions that you can go through with your leadership team. And this would be a great exercise at the beginning of the school year or for a retreat or something to really gain that clarity. And I won't go into great detail because there's a lot here, but it starts with a question, why do we exist? And you may say, we're a school. It's clear why really, why, get into what is it about your school or why do you exist? How do we behave? That's about finding the core values that really define what makes your school your school, and not just the generic ones, but try to drill down and be as specific as possible. He talked about one organization, one of their core values is willing to sweep floors. And what that meant is just everyone, regardless of title, was willing to do anything. And it was very specific and everyone knew what that meant. So that's the second question, is how do we behave? The third, what do we do? That's around what are the actual tasks of the school? Because it may be different regardless of whether, you think, oh, if we're a school in Nebraska or a school in Delaware, it's the same. But no, what is it that your school does? How will we succeed? What are the strategies at our school that we are relying on to succeed? Then possibly the most important question is number 5 is what is important right now? What is our priority? It needs to be singular for the next few months. What is so important that we as a leadership team and a school that we're going to focus on? And the final one is who does what. That's just sort of a list of roles and responsibilities, because you'd be surprised sometimes that is not clear in a school. So what he says is you really Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that that who must do what. I
Yeah.
I feel like it's been recent that I've had more of an appreciation for that, as we've been doing a lot of work around responding, preparing districts to respond to cyber attacks. And when you do an incident response plan, you do what's called a RACI chart. That stands for RACI. You basically take all the tasks on one axis and all the people on the other, and R is responsible, A is accountable for, C is, oh man, I forgot what C is. And I is informed, like, so that, I might be the leader. I'm on the chart, but it's not my job to go in and look at the logs. It's my job to be informed of what happened as a result of that. So,
Is
yeah, it's
C
interesting.
consulted? Consulted for
And it
C?
might be consulted. Yeah, I
Yep.
think it is. Okay, good work. Gotta respect the Google on that one. All right, so good work, Jen. All right, so those questions make total sense to me, and I think I do struggle sometimes with the why do we exist, and when we get the flowery mission statements that don't mean anything. But I think in the context of a leadership team and thinking about why we're here, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, and again, going back to where we are at this point in history, great to revisit our purpose during this challenging
Mhm.
time as well. So, yeah, I think it's a great exercise to do that. Obviously, leadership teams, their compositions change, so it might be something that you do regularly. But yeah, creating that clarity is the second discipline of organizational health.
And the third one, I think, might be my personal favorite,
Okay.
because it just, the idea, his number three is over communicate clarity. And this is a thing, and anybody who's worked in multiple organizations knows, that when you come in there, nobody ever communicates enough, right? You hear that feedback over and over again. The leadership doesn't communicate with us. They don't tell us what's going on. Now, even if you think you're communicating, you're probably not communicating enough, or maybe in the right ways. So, what does Lencioni say about how to over communicate clarity?
Well, he even gives us a number. He says you got to communicate over and over and over and over and over and over and over. He says that's right 7 times. I've heard claims that employees won't believe what leaders are communicating to them until they've heard it 7 times. So it's kind of
That's
like the number
fantastic.
of times you need to get your kid to taste broccoli before they like it. I don't know. I've heard like 27 or something. But anyway, 7 times. I mean, think about it, right? You remember being a teacher and thinking, oh, this too shall pass, or you don't fully hear it the right way, or you were distracted, or so. Yeah, so a lot of, remember, we're talking about organizational health and we're talking about clarity, consistency, wholeness. So if the leadership team makes a decision, you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and hears that decision. So the first thing you have to do is carve out time at the end of your meeting to make sure you say, okay, wait, are we all on the same page about this? Crystal clear. Go around. Let's go. We don't want 5 people who are just quiet. Let's go through all the 8 people. Are we crystal clear? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. And then he says that usually there's 2 types of communication in organizations, and we have this in schools too, right? You've got the top-down kind where the communication flow is one way, right? You send an email to someone, to the staff, sorry. You send an email to the staff or a newsletter to the staff, right? That's top down. That's one way. Then the other way is very bottom up, right? Lots of one-on-one conversations. And he says there's problems with both of them. The top down means that then people can't ask clarifying questions if they don't know what you're talking about. But the problem with the one-on-ones where you hear everybody is then they start to debate it, right? Or add their part, or, it's almost like it's equal one-on-one, a leadership team member and a staff member, a teacher. And you don't want it to change. You don't want the message to change. This is not dialogue. This is how do we communicate what we have decided. So he says the best thing to do is to use what he calls cascading information. He asks you to picture a rumor, right? How a rumor spreads. So at the end of the meeting, the 6 or 8 people on the cabinet say, okay, we're going to all go tell our people, this is the message we all agree on, and we're going to do it in 24 hours. So that way everybody in the organization hears it, and it is still a person. There's still some two-way if you don't understand it, but it's not a whole questioning, let's go back to the drawing board. So that's how he suggests that we over communicate clarity.
Love it. And then, and then number 4 is to reinforce clarity. So clarity seems to be a theme in this book.
Yeah.
so
Yes.
what does it mean to reinforce clarity? If we've already over communicated it, what's reinforcing it?
Well, it's funny, I read that and then I started reading. I was like, oh, why didn't he call this chapter systems? Because then I would understand what he's talking about. So what he says is that most of the time, the leadership team is not there when the stuff of the organization is being done, right? The leadership team is not there when teachers are teaching, when teachers are interacting with students in the cafeteria, right? So how can you make sure that those core values that you picked at the beginning are being reinforced everywhere, even when you're not there as a member of the leadership team? How do you do that? Structurally, you want to bake them in. So you think about all of the systems that you have in your school, whether it's a system for hiring new teachers, whether it's a system for developing and training teachers or onboarding new teachers, orienting teachers, whether it's a system for evaluating performance, whatever your systems are. And you want to look at those systems and see, do they reflect the values that you outlined and said, this is what our school is about? And so that's really smart, right? Because if the system is in place, then that means that, the leadership team can totally turn over and those systems will be in place. And he says, keep it simple. So for each one, for hiring, outline the steps, keep it simple, no more than a page, and make sure that it reflects the values that the leadership team agreed on.
Love it. And then, when we were doing our little pregame chat, and I love the content. I think this was a great choice for a book, and I think you're dead on, especially now. Not only coming off of a crazy couple of years, but also there's a ton of turnover at all levels in K-12 education. Right, administrators are retiring like crazy. It's hard to find people to backfill. In fact, I did an interview with my father the other night, which will be a special podcast series, a special series in here. My dad was a high school principal, and we were talking about just how, like, he was a teacher for 21 years before he became an administrator. I taught for like 6. And that's that's sort of the trend. I mean, people are going into administration with fewer and fewer years of experience. So, not only are we putting people in new positions, but we're putting people in positions and leadership positions who generally have, less experience in the system. So, yeah, I think fantastic focus for people. But the other thing we want to talk about, and Lencioni you mentioned the book Death by Meetings, but he talks about in this book how important meetings are and how important it is to be clear about the type of meeting you're having based on what you're trying to accomplish. So you want to talk a little bit about, how he breaks this down in terms of different types of meetings?
Yeah, so after he introduces the 4 disciplines that you need to have a healthy organization, then he talks about these great meetings. And he said that most people in organizations hate meetings. I'm sure we've heard a few complaints there. And part of it is because we don't really have meetings. We have meeting stew. And he says meeting stew is like a chef who just throws everything in from the fridge and hopes for the best. That we kind of do the same thing, right? And we do that in schools too, right? You put a whole bunch of unrelated items, like let's have some announcements about field trips and retiring, and right, and then let's do some learning, and then oh yeah, right, we have some speaker in who's going to talk about, I don't know, vaping, right? Like it's all over the place. So that's meeting stew. So of course we don't like that. But we do very distinct functions in meetings. So let's divide them out and let's have different meetings. Now, I'm not sure his suggestions for meetings are exactly, you can map them exactly to schools. but it's the idea of having a diversity of meetings, right? So for example, the leadership team should have a daily check-in, right? You literally stand so that and you make sure it's no more than 5 or 10 minutes, and it's just kind of dealing with small issues like, oh my gosh, we have 32 teachers out when we need subs, or just the small things so that they don't become big things. Standing up, that's all we're doing. Quick, what's going on today? Superintendent is visiting today, second period. Just really quick on your feet. And also, when you see each other every day, that's also addressing trust because you're building relationships. So that becomes your primary team. Even if you're the science department chair, even if you're the seventh grade team lead, if you meet every day with your cabinet, then that's going to build that relationship. So I love that. And I would keep it standing. Then he talks
And
about
short,
having,
right? I mean, did we say short?
yeah,
Five
oh,
to
I'm
ten
sorry,
minutes,
5 to 10 minutes. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
super short. Okay. So then
And
the
then
next one, the weekly leadership team meetings.
yeah. And, again, I don't know if this maps exactly, but it's the idea that you're going to have a longer period. It might be 45 minutes to 90 minutes. And you're really talking about that current priority, right? That answer to that question, what is our priority now? And you're really going around and sort of quickly sharing updates from that and just dealing with the priority, right? If our priority is improving student attendance or literacy or, whatever it is, but it's very focused on that. It's not a smorgasbord where you're adding, comments about anything else other than that. And then he jumps to ad hoc topical meetings. So if there's a big issue, let's say bullying is going on or you're cyberbullying or who knows, that you would have special meetings for special topics that come up. And then he talks about quarterly offsite like retreats, which we don't really have in schools that frequently, but it doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
I
I
mean,
think
we do it at the
you do it
central
quarterly.
office level. Oh,
Yeah.
not we won't do it quarterly, but a lot of times we'll do more annually, where we'll take different leadership groups and do retreats. Sometimes it's with a group of
Yeah.
superintendents, sometimes a cabinet. Yeah, so I think that happens, but not quarterly. I do like that idea of quarterly, like kind of just to keep everyone, because part of it too, and is being, like I said, being in different organizations, a lot of times to go back to the very first concept that he talks about, to build that trust, you need time together, right? And especially if you're in a big organization and you're spread around and you do a lot of meetings on Zoom, that just time on task together is something that I don't know, we seem to have lost a little bit in the last few years.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great idea. I'm just saying you don't have to take the whole thing that he recommends, just the idea of having different meetings for different purposes. And you sort of alluded to, structures impact what a team does, right? You might have structures that ensure everyone speaks, or my co-facilitator of my masterminds, he just introduced me to the 5-star meeting. And these are meetings that just focus on your priorities or your big rocks. So there's no space in this meeting agenda for, this is an announcement, or, we got to plan this field trip or whatever. No, it's only about the priorities and the meeting agenda. The structure of the meeting agenda reflects the goal of the meeting, right? So, yeah. Anyways, it's a good book for our time. You can read it now and think about planning something for next summer, or also, for the new year. It's a good time to rejuvenate your leadership team and start to bring schools back to health.
Well, and also too, even just to read it and then just take a look at the different teams that you're on and see, to what extent, because chances are, people are on different types of teams. You might, if you're an administrator, you have your leadership team that you work with on a daily basis, then you're probably part of another leadership team. And then you might be part of some ad hoc groups, committees and things. So that would be my recommendation. In fact, I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of think about these concepts in terms of the different groups that I'm a part of, and not necessarily judge, but maybe be a little judgmental about where each team is relative to these different concepts. So great choice on this one, Jen.
There's also, I have a link, and I'll probably include it in the PD section. There's a great online self-assessment you can do where you answer a bunch of questions and then it tells you for the 4 disciplines how you're doing in each one. So,
ooh, I love it. Very cool. The book is The Advantage: Why Organizational Health Trumps Everything Else in Business, and we would argue in education as well, by Patrick Lencioni. So thanks, Jen, for another fantastic conversation. And, put it out there. Please rate the show on iTunes if you would. And then also send us some ideas. I mean, we got a great suggestion from a listener when we did that top 10 principal one. That was fun. Right.
Yeah.
So send us some suggestions, and
send us
we'll be
some,
happy to
put our emails in the show notes. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.